With two small children, sometimes our living room can be a mess and we keep losing our TV remote. For our anniversary, I decided to build my wife a tray and personalize it with each family member's nickname.
Uh-oh, that's right. Y'all don't know I like to keep the peanut butter open.
I had some of this really pretty Claro walnut left over, and I really wanted to make something for our family with it. And then I had this ash that was left over for another project that I never ended up completing. If you've seen my videos before, you know I have multiple projects laying around my shop at all times. So please don't pay attention to this other project that's been finished and then these other projects that haven't. They are just there in the background. I started working pretty seriously on this tray a couple days before our anniversary and did end up giving it to her about a week late. The figuring on this walnut is really beautiful and I wanted the grain to wrap around the outside of the tray. Before ripping the walnut to width, I needed a square edge. The joiner wasn't quite doing it for me, so I finally just got out the track saw. There isn't a ton of extra room in my small shop, so to get this large track down, it takes a little bit of gymnastics and some aerial acrobatics, but I got it set in place and made a nice clean cut. Now I can put the side I cut with the track saw against my table saw fence and rip it to the width that I'm looking for. I do recommend using a ripping blade for ripping and a combination or a crosscut blade for any cross-cutting on hardwoods. So I'm going to mark these pieces. This is going to be the first side. I'm going to cut it and then we'll do the miters later on in order to keep the continuous grain around the outside. With the sides cut to the length that I wanted, I took two pieces of ash and I folded them up like a book and then ran them through the jointer and then glued them together. This is definitely a good trick for a nice solid glue up if you aren't sure that your fence on your joiner is perfect. Getting back to work on the outside walnut pieces, I ran them through the planer to make them the same thickness and to clean them up. The longer outside pieces of this tray aren't going to have handles, so that excess can be just ripped off. To mark out the lines for the handle, I used my double square to mark an equal distance from each side of the end. I then use a can to mark the radius. I probably should have used a larger radius in order to keep the swoop a little bigger, so it would make the sanding a lot easier in the corner. At this point, I decided to cut the miters. It is a struggle for me to get perfect 45s cut on this miter saw. I did my best and then ended up not being happy, so then I recut them on the table saw using my crosscut sled. To do this, I used a stop block to make sure each of the side rails were the same length and then each of the end rails were the same length. Alright, so here's my plan to cut out the handles. I'm going to use a Forstner bit. I'm going to cut along this line. With the center of the Forstner bit, and I'm going to go all the way to here. All the way to here. To get the handles cut out, I hogged out most of the material with the drill press. And then I used the jigsaw, which I used a method I wouldn't recommend using. And then I used a chisel and a sander to get it all cleaned up and nice and smooth.
I love that sound.
So this knot right here has definitely become a problem since it cracked and popped out. Chisel. My current plan A, is going to be to super glue it in, and hopefully when I come in through with the router bit it stays, but I really doubt that's going to happen, but it's worth a try at this point.
It's working. It's working.
This spindle sander does come in very handy when sanding inside small slots like this. I'm not quite sure I got the settings perfect on the laser, but I got the family nicknames engraved into this and it left some nice deep grooves. I didn't want crumbs and cracks and dirt and dust to fall into the grooves of the font, so I decided to fill it in with some epoxy. After all this work, I still needed to put the dados in the sides of the tray for the bottom to fit in. So I made a pretty big mistake. I didn't lock my fence in. I think I was too worried about getting the shot. These two grooves for the bottom should be at the same exact height. So what I'm going to do to fix this, I'm going to find the one with the highest cut. I'm going to rip them all at that height and then cut away, move down, because the dado is not thick enough yet to where it'll fit my bottom, which is right there. But I'm going to make the top of the dado the same for all of them, and then I'll cut down, and then if I need to go back up again, I will. The plan to fix those dados worked really well. I was lucky that the dados weren't more off than they were. After a bunch of measurements, I squared up the font on the bottom and then centered it the best I could and ripped off the edges with the track saw to make it fit. Once I was happy with the test fit, I put some glue on the rails and got it in the clamps. So here's the spline jig I just pulled together. I got a 90-degree cut on plywood, glued it together, then I just made some wedges to fit into my crosscut sled. Didn't even put some glue on it, but wedging it right there in this crosscut sled makes it nice and solid. Should work when I slide it through. Cut some splines. So the way I have my spline jig set up is once this slides through on my crosscut sled, I've got about 3/4 of an inch between the bottom or top of my tray before where the blade is, and I've got the square set up as a stop block, and I just clamped it in and made sure it was square on the bottom and the top. So hopefully I get some nice straight square splines, 3/4 of an inch from the top and the bottom. I was happy with how my quick spline jig worked out, so I ripped some thin strips of ash and glued them in. I decided to use this flush cut saw to somewhat flush cut them into the side, and then I just sanded the rest smooth.
to come over and pick up Bella and take her shopping to get shorts and shoes at Target.
Okay, when this one?
Well, he's coming back.
Okay.
So swims not till 11:30. I told him, I was like, you can take her shopping, but she has to swim at 11:30.
I have no idea what you're saying.
And I was like, oh, there's one problem. He's like, what? When she's still sleeping. He's like, that's not over here.
We Valdez nearly lost a finger.
After changing my underwear real quick, I used a clamp, and this was a safer way to flush cut the splines. For the finish on this tray, I used Rubio Monocoat Pure. I've used it before. I've used it on this walnut, and it looks amazing. This finish is really easy to apply. I use a scrubby pad to rub it in, and then I wait about 10 minutes and then buff it off with an old t-shirt. I'm really happy with how this tray turned out. I really like this walnut, and I'm happy I found a project with it that my family can enjoy on a regular basis. I think this was a nice gift to make for my wife, even if it was about a month late. If you made it this far in the video, I really appreciate it. There are similar videos out there that are probably better than mine about building a wooden tray. Let me know if it showed too many steps or not in the comments. I want to do my best to keep it interesting. Thanks again for watching.